Greetings, adventurers. You're listening to The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood with me, Professor Atwood. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to tell you about my latest journey. Don't worry, it's a safe space. I'll handle all the danger for you. I designed these stories to help you relax, chill anxiety, and go to sleep. Maybe they'll even put a smile on your face, even if it's a sleepy smile. So please, settle in, relax, and prepare to quietly drift off with me to parts known, unknown, and even some places in between. Comfortable? Very well. Let's get underway. Good evening, adventurers. I hope you're doing well. I also hope you're all cozy and settled in because tonight I'm going to tell you about our slightly delayed farewell to Mars and our journey back to Earth. There was an unexpected stop along the way, but I'll get to that in a bit. As you remember, we were just finishing up our successful Mars mission when the sentient meteor swarm returned, blocking the blast-off path of our rockets. Both mine, the Journeyman, and my son's, the John Carter. We dealt with the sentient meteor swarm with the help of my friend Tom the Futurist and the retractable dome of his Martian amusement park. And as a bonus, the sentient meteor swarm became even more sentient and even enlightened, and after it was repaired, it would go off exploring on its own. And I will tell you all about our farewell to Mars and our journey home in a moment. But first, I want to mention again a note about our stories. They are designed for you to drift in and out of, and while yes, I do like to tell you a full story with every episode, drifting in and out or falling completely asleep is factored into the equation. You can pick things up anywhere, and that's why I do the story recaps at the beginning. And if you're here, awake, and hanging on every word, just know that I appreciate it, the entire crew appreciates it, and we try to add additional flourishes and flavor in there just for you. So by all means, enjoy the show any way you wish. It's designed that way. No rules and no pressure, adventurers. I'd also like to nudge you to rate the show with a bunch of stars. Reviews are great too. It's always nice to read pleasant things about what we're doing over here. And this is important. Don't forget to tell your friends directly about the show and post about it wherever you post about things. The more adventurers, the merrier. Now, before I mention the White Cat Adventurers Club, I want to remind you that we've created a Science and Adventure Helper donation link on the homepage. So just go to whitecatentertainment.com and click Donate for a one-time donation. Then you can do it whenever you like for whatever you like. But if you do want more, there's the White Cat Adventurers Club. You get early access, well, sometimes, and ad-free listening to all the shows and an exclusive look at my very irregular journal. Science and exploring is expensive, and your support helps make it happen. And for just $5 a month, you can show your support for the show and for the company. There are different tiers with different rewards, including a bonus episode of What Are You Watching every single month, only for White Cat Adventurers Club members. There's a t-shirt, and you even get all the graphic novels at the $10 tier and above. So please go to patreon.com/whitecatentertainment and enjoy the access your way. All right, now let's get back to the story. Now, as you remember from last time, we were treated to yet another one of Space Chef Jillian's amazing Martian farewell dinners. We were all quite full, and the crew was doing some last-minute packing up. We still needed to do a round of last-minute checks and inspections, but that wouldn't take very long. Flight Commander Barry and Flight Engineer Kara were already taking care of things, and all the final blastoff preparations were well underway. It was time. I was not looking forward to this moment, but I had to say goodbye to my son, and we hugged tightly. He said, "See you on Earth," and I said I would expect him for dinner at my home lab as soon as we were both on the same planet again. He smiled and said he couldn't wait. So we all said goodbye to Patrick and his crew, as Flight Engineer Brian with a Y, and their linguist Daryl, also with a Y. Next, I said a royal goodbye to King Targon and Queen Melanidia, and we once again smiled and talked about how successful the mission was. All of the Martian mysteries presented to us at the outset were now solved, from Tom the Futurist's time ghost to my son's missing and then found ship, the John Carter, to the sentient meteor swarm going rogue, to the so-called Martian ruins, and then, of course, how enjoyable the new Martian amusement park was. I particularly liked the time-traveling log flume and the characters walking around. My favorite was the aged giant pocket watch called Old Timey. He really added to the atmosphere. Anyway, we had also forged a quite groundbreaking terraforming agreement with the King and Queen and the Martian Parliament. This also explained the mystery of the tight-lipped mission specialist Janet and what her mission parameters really were. However, she ended up being a crew member with a wide and varied skill set, including an extensive knowledge of time travel and tachyons, top-notch sharpshooting skills, and even a fair amount of experience with close-up magic and stage magic. Okay, well, the last one we didn't really need, but it was quite an interesting story to hear about her previously unknown history in Hollywood with Flight Commander Barry, who was a former television writer before he came to his senses. I then said goodbye to Tom, my futurist friend from the future. He thanked me again for getting him unstuck in time, and had already given the Time City amusement techs a full lecture about tachyonic time slippage. It would not happen again. We smiled and hugged. It was good to see him. I didn't know when I would see him again. Well, he did, of course, being from the future, but he wasn't talking. King Targon then gave me some parting gifts, but told me not to open them until we were well on our way. Now, I do love getting presents, and it would be hard to wait to open them, but I promised I would. We then donned our NASA spacesuits again, and if I'm being honest, noticed immediately how much less comfortable they were than the Martian spacesuits. Janet must have seen all of our faces and anticipated the next question, and she said no. We would have to wear the NASA spacesuits, as protocol was protocol. We ascended the Martian elevator to the surface, exited from the hidden access hatch, and prepared to board our rocket, the Journeyman. We then noticed the Mars Ingenuity probe nearby with a broken rotor. It looked like the Mars probe avoidance team had gotten a little too aggressive again, but Janet mentioned that if they hadn't secretly repaired it yet, it probably already sent pictures of its broken rotor back to Earth, so there was nothing they could do about it now. It would just have to sit there for a while, sending back pictures. However, I saw the probe avoidance team must have positioned the Ingenuity copter so the camera was pointed away from the access hatch, so they were able to at least get that done before it sent pictures back to Earth. Still, I would be interested in confirming everything with NASA when we return to Earth. I took a deep breath and just looked at the Journeyman before boarding. She was a beautiful ship. Even with the rotating gravity ring, it still felt sleek and stylish. I walked up the ramp into my ship with a smile on my face. Honestly, it was a good feeling boarding the Journeyman again. It's always the first step on the way home. Your vehicle, whether it's taking you for a flight or a drive or even a cruise, there's something comforting about getting into your own vehicle for the journey home. I continued to smile as I performed one last walk-through inspection before takeoff. I've said before that walking around the deck is one of my favorite things to do when I'm on board my ocean-bound ship, the Recovery. And while it's not quite the same walking through a much more compact spaceship, it sometimes scratches the same itch, as it were, and I would most likely be doing it again once we were in space. Final checks were made by the crew, and soon we were all strapped into our command seats for takeoff. I would have loved to have seen takeoff from the observation deck, but again, we weren't quite there yet with NASA protocols, and I made a mental note to install a retractable command seat into the observation deck before our next space adventure. We were coordinating with the Mars Science team from the command center in the Martian inner city, and they began our countdown. I mean, it was in Martian, but everyone got the idea. I took a deep breath and felt the joy and anticipation of heading back home to Earth. Still, like I said before, there was a little melancholy as well, since we had a lovely Christmas on Mars. I also would have loved to explore the Mars Retro Amusement Park even further, and then perhaps grill Tom about its inner workings. Of course, he would have just smiled and given me vague cryptic answers to protect the timeline. But I also think he enjoyed the playful technological teasing as well. Tom was a good friend, and I would miss him. We felt the extra G-force as we blasted off, and while I know I have just complained about not having enough time at an amusement park, being on an actual rocket during takeoff makes up for it, and then some. And then, just like that, we were off into space, the great starry beyond, on our way home. Once we had reached cruising altitude, Flight Commander Barry jokingly said he would turn off the seatbelt sign and that we were free to move about the spacecraft. The pressure, gravity, and air concentrations had all been normalized, so everyone took off their spacesuits and began going about their duties. The journey home would be a bit more relaxing, as there was no more mission prep and no more mysteries to puzzle out. Or so I thought. The journey home would take an unusual turn and involve an unexpected stop, but more on that in a bit. The first few days of the journey home were quite uneventful, and I think everyone enjoyed the break and the quiet, that's for sure. I looked over the mission debrief documents, the crew went about their duties, and everyone was in good spirits as we made our way back home. After a little over a week had passed, we had all pretty much settled into our routines. I continued to walk through the journeyman and make my rounds every day, so to speak. But today, I wanted to stop by and congratulate each crew member on a job well done. I found Bradley and Dolores in the observation deck, holding hands and enjoying the view. They smiled as I walked in, and we all enjoyed the view out of the large observation window for a bit. The calm vastness of space dotted with bright stars was infinite and awe-inspiring. I thought about the sentient meteor swarm and where it would decide to head off to once it was repaired. I wondered if we would see it again. I turned to Bradley and once again thanked him for another job well done. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without him. I also thanked Dolores, our security officer/mercenary, for keeping everyone safe, and I said I was happy her astrophobia was under control. She thanked me again for the opportunity and was glad everything had worked out. I took another moment to enjoy the view from the large bay window out into the reaches of space. I remember when we first took off, watching Mars get smaller and smaller as we departed, and watched it go out of sight entirely. It was, like I said, bittersweet, but also it just meant we were getting closer to home. I came back to the present, smiled, and told Bradley and Dolores to carry on, and exited the observation bay. My next stop was our space galley, where I checked in on Jillian, our space chef. She was preparing a light lunch for the crew consisting of salads and sandwiches, and thanked her once again for a job well done back on Mars. It wasn't easy cooking on another planet, and for people who weren't human, but she adapted beautifully and integrated seamlessly with the Martian chefs to create multiple fine meals. She also thanked me for the opportunity and would look into other space opportunities for someone with her skills. Well, I didn't have the heart to tell her there weren't that many. NASA is more old school, and their spacecraft don't even have galleys, and they're still stuck on astronaut food and zero gravity. Sure, their propulsion systems were more advanced, but no one could beat the journeyman when it came to comfort in space travel. Sure, some billionaires were working on it, but let's just say they still had some ground to cover, and leave it at that. Jillian offered me a space cupcake fresh from the oven, and I couldn't resist. It was light and airy, and the icing was in the shape of the journeyman, which really personalized it. It was delicious, of course. My next stop was our sickbay, which didn't see a lot of use this mission. As I've said before, better to have a medic and not need him than not have a medic and need him. But Aaron ended up contributing in an unexpected way. His ex-Air Force and covert ops sharpshooting skills came in very handy during the issue with the sentient meteor swarm. He took to our defensive laser system like a duck to water once we needed manual targeting. I was glad I had him on board. He said things were quiet in sickbay, but to let him know if we needed anything. I didn't foresee needing a medic for the rest of the trip, but it turned out I was wrong. But I'll be getting to that a bit later as well. Since there was not a lot for him to do after inspections, I found him reading a book on the history of Martian medicine from the Martian Library. King Targon had gifted us all our choice of books from the library, and what made them special is that they adjusted to the reader's language, so the content would never be lost to someone who couldn't read Martian. Of course, some nuances are always lost in translation, but physically visiting Mars and experiencing the culture personally can certainly mitigate that issue. Aaron was glad to be of help, even if it was manning the lasers instead of patching up the crew, and I said on an adventure, help is help. It doesn't matter where it comes from. I thanked him again and left him to his book. The next stop was to see Stephen, not Steve, our linguist. Even though the terraforming agreement was already signed, he was going over the agreement one last time to make sure he didn't miss anything, as the Martian language can be complicated as there are many rules, with casual and formal speaking depending on who you're talking to, and also what the weather was like, which made it even more complicated since the Martians lived underground and there was no weather. I thanked Stephen for taking on the agreement with Janet, our NASA mission specialist. He said it was a great opportunity and the hours in the Martian library were worth the trip on their own. I then stopped by our engine room where Kara, our flight engineer, was again inspecting the engines and life support systems. I thanked Kara for keeping things running and told her to get some rest. Because of her, everything was in good shape. She said she would rest soon, but there were still some minor repairs to do from our first encounter with the sentient meteor swarm. She was very dedicated to her job. That much was clear, and since we were in space and needed our spacecraft to be functioning properly at all times, that was a very good thing. She smiled and said she would never forget this trip. Well, neither would I, that's for sure. I left her to it after she promised me she would get some rest after the inspections. I found Flight Commander Barry on the bridge. Everything was going smoothly. We were even a little ahead of schedule. Tailwinds? I joked. Barry smiled and said Kara had tweaked the engines a bit during our repairs, and we were making better time than on the way here. I smiled and noticed that she didn't mention that, as she was modest as well. Barry was also very glad he came on board this journey, and I said it was always a pleasure to have an experienced and stable hand at the helm. This wouldn't be our last adventure together. Of that, I was certain. I was on my way to see Janet, the NASA mission specialist, last. Despite her keeping certain mission parameters and information secret from me for far longer than I thought necessary, she proved to be an invaluable member of the crew and was instrumental to the mission's success. The terraforming agreement was all her, and the support with Tom the time-traveling futurist, tachyonic fields, and time ghosts was all much appreciated. And it turned out she wasn't a bad shot either. Harren Aaron had manned the defensive laser systems to deal with the sentient meteor swarm the second time. But I never got the chance to thank her for her contributions to the mission. As I was going to find her, she found me instead in the corridor outside our game room. She appeared to be a little out of breath and looked worried. I asked what was wrong. She said we had received a distress call on a secure channel. She saw the look on my face and told me not to worry. My son and the John Carter were already home. They made even better time returning, which I found remarkable. I would have to compare notes with the NASA scientists at JPL when we got back, for sure. No, Janet added, the distress call was from the International Space Station, or ISS for short. They had a problem, and it was as unusual as it was unexpected, apparently. I asked how big a problem it was, and Janet admitted that she wasn't sure, and that the problem seemed to be fluid and growing. We would have to get there right away to help. I told Flight Commander Barry to change our course. I informed the crew we would be making a stop along the way before home. Now, the crew may be a little disappointed, but they would understand, as they were fellow space adventurers in need. Now, as I'm sure you know, the International Space Station, or ISS, is the largest modular space station in low Earth orbit. The project involves 5 space agencies: the United States, NASA, Russia's Roscosmos, Japan's JAXA, Europe's ESA, and Canada's CSA. The ownership and use of the space station is established by intergovernmental treaties and agreements. It's one of the few times they can actually work together and agree on things, but that's another story. The station serves as a microgravity and space environment research laboratory in which scientific research is conducted in astrobiology, astronomy, meteorology, physics, and other fields. Apparently, it was one of those so-called other fields that was causing the mysterious growing problem. Anyway, the ISS is suited for testing the spacecraft systems and equipment required for possible future long-duration missions to the Moon and Mars. Now, again, that's the forward-facing press release. Sure, they're working on those things, but it's mostly other fields, quote, that take up a fair amount of time and lab space. The ISS program evolved from the space station Freedom, a 1984 American proposal to construct a permanently crewed Earth-orbiting station, and the contemporaneous Soviet-Russian Mir-2 proposal from 1976 with similar aims. The ISS is the 9th space station to be inhabited by crews, following the Soviet and later Russian Salyut, Almaz, and Mir stations and the American Skylab. It is the largest artificial object in the solar system and the largest satellite in low Earth orbit, regularly visible to the naked eye from Earth's surface. Not many people know that. I mean, you have to know where to look and when, but if you do, you just may spot it. The ISS maintains an orbit with an average altitude of 250 miles by means of reboost maneuvers using the engines of the Zvezda service module or visiting spacecraft. The ISS circles the Earth in roughly 93 minutes, completing 15.5 orbits per day. Now, the station is divided into 2 sections. The first is the Russian orbital segment, or ROS, operated by, Russia, while the second is the United States orbital segment, USOS, run by the United States as well as other countries. The Russian segment includes 6 habitable modules. The U.S. segment includes 7 habitable modules, whose support services are distributed 76.6% for NASA and 12.8% for Japan's JAXA, 8.3% for Europe's ESA, and 2.3% for Canada's CSA. The length along the major axis of the pressurized sections is 218 feet, and the total habitable volume of these sections is 13,696 cubic feet. The first ISS component was launched in 1998, and the first long-term residents arrived on November 2, 2000, after being launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome on October 31, 2000. Halloween, interestingly enough. The station has since been continuously occupied for 22 years and 236 days, the longest continuous human presence in low Earth orbit, having surpassed the previous record of 9 years and 357 days held by the Mir space station. The latest major pressurized module, Nauka, was fitted in 2021, a little over 10 years after the previous major addition, Leonardo, in 2011. In January 2022, the station's operation authorization was extended to 2030, with funding secured within the United States through that year. There have been calls to privatize ISS operations after that point to pursue future Moon and Mars missions, with former NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine stating, "Given our current budget constraints, if we want to go to the Moon and we want to go to Mars, we need to commercialize low Earth orbit and go on to the next step." Now, Jim's really good at NASA PR. Most people don't know NASA has been to Mars multiple times already, of course. And the Moon, well, I'll leave what's on the Moon already for another time. Anyway, the ISS consists of pressurized habitation modules, structural trusses, photovoltaic solar arrays, thermal radiators, docking ports, experiment bays, and robotic arms. Major ISS modules have been launched by Russian Proton and Soyuz rockets and U.S. space shuttles. The station is serviced by a variety of visiting spacecraft: the Russian Soyuz in progress, the SpaceX Dragon 2, and the Northrop Grumman Space System Cygnus, and formerly the European Automated Transfer Vehicle, or ATV, the Japanese H-2 Transfer Vehicle, and SpaceX Dragon 1. The Dragon spacecraft allows the return of pressurized cargo to Earth, which is used, for example, to repatriate scientific experiments for further analysis. As of April 2022, 251 astronauts, cosmonauts, and space tourists from 20 different nations have visited the space station, many of them multiple times. I suppose space tourism will continue to grow, and I have mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, I think it's great that more and more people want to experience spaceflight. But on the other hand, I feel that it will be a deluge of, well, how should I put it? Untrained rich people and celebrities going off into space for a while first. Space travel should eventually be available to all, but I digress. Anyway, getting back to the ISS history. In the early 1980s, NASA planned to launch a modular space station called Freedom as a counterpart to the Soviet Salyut and Mir space stations. In 1984, the ESA was invited to participate in Space Station Freedom, and the ESA approved the Columbus Laboratory by 1987. The Japanese experiment module, GEM, or Kibo, was announced in 1985 as part of the Freedom space station in response to a NASA request in 1982. In early 1985, science ministers from the European Space Agency, or like I said, the ESA, approved the Columbus program, the most ambitious effort into space undertaken by that organization at the time. The plan, spearheaded by Germany and Italy, included a module which would be attached to Freedom and with the capability to evolve into a full-fledged European orbital outpost before the end of the century. The space program was also going to tie the emerging European and Japanese national space programs closer to the U.S.-led project, thereby preventing those nations from becoming major independent competitors, too. In September 1993, American Vice President Al Gore and Russian Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin announced plans for a new space station, which eventually became the International Space Station. They also agreed, in preparation for the new project, the United States would be involved in the Mir program, including American shuttles docking at the Mir station. Now, the ISS was originally intended to be a laboratory, observatory, and factory, while providing transportation, maintenance, and a low Earth orbit staging base for possible future missions to the Moon, Mars, and to various interesting asteroids. While not all of these goals have been realized, they are well on their way, and even more so than people realize. In the 2010 United States National Space Policy, the ISS was given additional roles of serving commercial, diplomatic, and educational purposes as well. Now, this I completely agree with, as science can be the cornerstone of all understanding between nations and serves as an invaluable tool for education. I would like to see more of that for sure. So after speaking with Barry, our flight commander, we would be docking with the International Space Station in a couple of days, tops, especially with Kara's new ion drive enhancements. I met with Janet and tried to get a little more information. Janet said unfortunately she didn't have much to go on, as the communication was garbled and she couldn't get a sense of exactly what the problem was, just that it was very urgent. I asked her if we had any idea of what to expect. She was quiet for a moment and said she really didn't know. But she did say before communication was lost, she thought she heard what sounded like water bear, but she couldn't be sure. She said she also may have heard the words moss piglet. Now, I admit I wasn't quite sure what to make of all that, but I did have an idea. And what I started to piece together in my head made me a little nervous, to be honest, especially if it was true that the problem was indeed growing. And I will tell you all about what awaited us at the International Space Station next time. But before I end this evening's story, I want to talk to you about something. Sometimes, all you want to do is go home. You've been away for a while, and you just want to sleep in your nice warm bed and have a meal prepared in your own kitchen. And sometimes, there's an unexpected delay, like a flight being canceled or a volcano erupting. And sometimes, no matter how badly you want to get home, you make the time for one more stop because someone needs help. And adventurers, sometimes that's the most important journey of all, a side trip to help someone in need. So as much as we all wanted to be home on our own planet and in our own beds, we knew the right thing to do was to help the scientists and astronauts on the ISS. So our arrival home would have to wait a little longer. But the takeaway here, adventurers, is that it's really important to be of service, no matter how much you just want to go home. So go out. Be of service. Help other people. There's one thing you will probably already have in common. The person or people you're helping probably want to go home as well. So as you embark on your own journeys and take the time to help someone else, you're not just helping them out of a tight spot, you're helping them get home safe and sound, just where you want to be as well. There's no greater mission than that. Good night, adventurers.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tansky at rontanskymusic.com. For more info and merchandise, including t-shirts, mugs, and blankets, go to whitecatentertainment.com.